All right. So, welcome guys to the low poly earth tutorial. And this is what we're going to be making right here. Super fun, super easy. Should only take about 20-ish minutes or so. Maybe a little bit longer if we slack. I've already recorded this twice and realized that my encoding method was completely invalid and corrupted the file. So we're going to retry it and hopefully it works. But it's not going to be this exactly because I'm not going to sit here and just copy and paste numbers. But yeah, so this is the little low poly earth that we're going to be creating. So let's go file, new, and what we're going to be doing is the very first thing before we do anything in Blender is make sure you have this downloaded. It'll be linked below. It's the 2K, so the 2K resolution Earth specular map. It's the one you want. Can't miss it. Big buttons. Very nice website that I'm linking. Been around for a long time, but we want this specular map. I'm not going to explain what it is and what it does, but we need this file. Very important. Okay. Back in Blender, hit A to select everything, hit X to delete everything, and you can either hit Enter or left mouse button, doesn't matter. But the very first thing we want to import is a sphere. So hit Shift A, go to Mesh, and then we want UV sphere. Now, what we want is to click on this little parameters tab down here. This is going to let us edit like the sort of starting values of the sphere. And the only thing we're going to change are these segments from 32 to 128, and then the rings from 16 to 64. And that's going to give us more geometry to work with for our like map to grab onto to displace the geometry. But speaking of displacing, we're going to go to modifiers, and we're going to add 3 modifiers in this order. It's very specific that you do it in this order. Add modifier, and then I like to do, we're going to do subdivision surface. Add another modifier, and I always just search for it. It's just easier. We want the displace modifier, so subdivision, then displace, then we want the decimate modifier. All right, you might be asking yourself if you kind of know already how to use Blender, why are we subdividing then decimating? Well, we're subdividing to give it even more geometry to work with when we go and displace it with our map, but then we're decimating it because it's low poly, right? We're decimating it just all the way down. It's already at 32,000 faces. I'm going to bump this up one more time. We're at 130,000 faces, right? So this is not very performant, it's especially for those with not so great computers, which is perfectly fine. But I'm actually going to keep this at 0 just to make sure that everything runs smoothly while I'm working. And we're going to click New on the Displace modifier. Get this out of here. There we go. We're going to click New. And you might have noticed that the sphere gets smaller as soon as you press the New button. And that's because a blank texture is completely black. So what it's basically doing is it's taking all the black values and making them super small, and taking the white values and making them super big or super like far away from the center. But because there is no white, it's not, it just a smaller sphere, right? Okay, go ahead and open that specular map you downloaded. Depends on where it is and where you're going, but that's where I stored it. Then we're going to want to go back to the modifier tab, and let's change the strength from a 1 to a negative 0.15, and then a decimate to 0.015. Now, this looks like a complete ball of junk, and that's because it is. We still need to change a few settings, but the first one is these coordinates. We're going to go from local to UV in the displace. And then we're going to change these levels on the viewport. I would avoid using the arrows. Even on a computer like mine, it slows down quite a bit. So I'm just going to type in 2 and then hit enter. And then after a little bit of time, bam, we have our Earth. Ta-da, right? If I were to unsubdivide this, which takes a little bit, you'd see that there's lots and lots and lots of geometry, and that comes from the subdivision surface, but also all those vertices we made at the beginning. So 0.015. All right, and just to keep my performance high, I'm going to end up applying all of these. Make sure you do it in order, like I'm doing. So subdivision surface, then displace, then decimate, and there we go. So we went from what, 130,000 faces to 3,000 faces? It's pretty good, right? All right, I'm going to do the material first, but before that, I'm going to rename this to land because this is our land. Let's go to the materials tab, add a new material. call it land, make it green, and turn the roughness to 1. Pretty much it. Very simple material, right? The green doesn't really matter too much. I'm going to make it a little bit of a desaturated green. Here's the hex value. If you want to copy it directly, feel free. I won't be upset. And then the next thing we want to do is import another sphere. So Shift A, mesh, UV sphere. And then where this is going to be our ocean. I'm not even going to change the size because I think the size looks good. But we're going to call this ocean and give it another material called ocean. You guys are getting it now. So for the base color, we're just going to do a blue. Maybe sort of a darker blue. I guess right there. There's the hex value. If you want to copy it, you can if you want. But this is sort of just up to our artistic discretions. For the roughness, this is going to be a 0.05. So very, very small value. So 5% of our original roughness. Or I guess 10% of our original roughness, but 5% of one roughness for like full roughness. So for the sphere, we're going to go to a modifier tab, and we're going to add a decimate modifier. I found that a value of 0.04 works pretty good for this, and then make sure you click that triangulate button. And that's just going to keep our low poly look, but then also give us like an ocean. All right. Let's go into our color view, and there we can see our reflective ocean and our land that doesn't reflect any light. All right, if that's all you wanted for a low poly earth, then there you go, 6 minutes and 51 seconds later, according to my little timestamp right here. There you go. But for those who want to continue, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the trees. We're going to model the trees in the clouds, which are very, very, very simple, I promise. All right, let's add 2 more collections. We're going to call this one trees and this one clouds. Okay. I'm going to disable this collection right here. And then with the tree selection, with the tree collection selected, I am going to add a cylinder, and we're going to give that cylinder 6 vertices. And I can go back into my viewport shading for this. Again, instead of material preview mode, or just solid shading, I guess it's called. But what we're going to do is, this is sort of weird to make, so just make sure you follow along and use your listening ears. If you have a numpad, that's great. If not, just click on one of these little X or Y little widgets up here, and then go into edit mode. And while in edit mode, make sure your vertice select is on, your vertex select, and then turn on your X-ray mode up here. Highlight a box over the top vertices, hit E to extrude, and then type 4 for 4 meters. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is sort of the tricky part, and this is the hardest part of this entire tutorial, is we're going to click E to extrude, and then don't click anything else. Move your mouse up a little bit, and then right-click to reset its position. And what that is doing was we basically just extruded it 0 meters. Then what you're going to do is type S to scale it, and then 4 to, or maybe we'll do 5. We'll do 5. So you do S and then hit 5, and that's basically just going to scale those vertices we just made outwards. So if I go up here, this is going to be the bottom of the leaves, and this is what it looks like. So back in our side view mode, if you hit E to extrude, there's not really a number associated with these. I'm just sort of extruding and scaling. So then we're going to scale it down after extruding it, just like that. Extrude again. This is the same thing as the first one. So extrude, right click, scale, and then we're just going to make it smaller than the leaves below it. So this vertex comes out to like here. We're just going to scooch it in by 1 line. Extrude, make it smaller, extrude, right click, scale, make it a little bit smaller, extrude, make it smaller. And there's our tree. We can rename it up here to tree. And then we're going to give this, that was by far the hardest part of this tutorial. So if you got past that, then you're golden. Trust me. All right. So for this tree, we want 2 materials. So let's make 2 materials. The first one is going to be called leaves. And the second one is going to be called trunk. All right. So for our leaves, we're going to make this roughness 100% or just 1. And then we're going to give it sort of a darker green, maybe something like that. There's the hex value if you want it that I'm going to be using. And then for our trunk, same thing, roughness 100%, base color. And to make a brown, all I'm going to do is just sort of go like a beige yellow and then just drop the darkness way, 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 way down. So we have green and brown. All right. Last thing for the tree, we're going to want to go to the face select mode and then draw a box over the trunk with the trunk material selected. Click assign. And then just to make sure that everything worked properly, turn off X-ray mode and then go to the color mode. And so I can see that I now have my green for the leaves and then brown for the trunk. This is good. This is good to go for the tree. Very last thing, I apologize. It's very important that in object mode, make sure your scale is 1. It doesn't matter how big your tree is, just make sure that it's 1. Just make sure that the scale is 1. 1, 1, 1. Very important. If it's not, hit Control A and apply the scale. If you scale it, that's perfectly fine. If for some reason you want all your trees to look like this, they'll look like this if you don't apply the scale for this. So if I apply the scale, now they'll look like this. But I don't want them to look like that. I want them to look like this. So apply the scale. All right. Last one for the clouds. Let's make sure we have the clouds collection selected. Let's go to the icosphere and give it 1 subdivision. Same thing. I'm going to go to the little side view here. All right. This modeling is even easier. Watch this. This is how you make a cloud professionally, by the way. Click on your icosphere with 1 subdivision. Hit Shift D, and then just sort of move it to the left. But like make sure they're intersecting like that. Make sure they're touching. Hit Shift D again, and then bring one over here to the right. And then make this one a little bit smaller while it's still touching. Make sure this one's smaller while it's still touching. And then here's a pro blender tip for you. Maybe like blender tip number 3 or 4. I haven't really been counting, but if you have an object selected and you double tap R, like hit R twice, it'll actually rotate on all of the axes, sort of like one of those little like mouse tracking balls that used to be on old mice. But then I just like to randomly rotate these just a little bit. So it doesn't look like just a plain old icosphere that I just imported, right? A little bit of variation is always good. All right. For the cloud, last thing we're going to do, it's already white, so there's no point in giving it a white material. I'm going to highlight all of these clouds and then shift click this this cloud in the middle to make sure it's like the active cloud. And then hit Control J. Oop, Control J. Not working. Control J. There we go. Because we only want 1 cloud. We don't want 3. All right. Disable that collection. Go to our collection over here. We have our little sphere. We have our earth. Click on the land. You can open that collection. Click on the land. And then we're gonna go into geometry nodes. All right. Now, for geometry nodes, if you've never done geometry nodes before, it's perfectly fine. I'm not even really going to look at the earth when I do this because I just want enough space for all my geometry nodes. But at a very basic level, we want to distribute the trees across the face of the planet. We want to make sure they're always pointing away from the middle of the sphere. And then all we want to do is merge everything back at the end with the original mesh. The original mesh being this land, right? So if you hit Shift A and then on the search bar, just go join geometry. That'll make sure that anything we plug into here, this little socket right here, gets joined up with our original mesh, right? All right. So from this little nodule right here, I want to distribute points on faces, and then I want to instance on those points. And then I want to join my instances with the original geometry, right? Okay. Now, for our actual tree that we want to put on the earth, just drag down the tree over here, the tree node, and then plug the instances into instance, and then make sure you separate, reset, and pick instance. It's very important. You can make many different tree variations if you'd like. It's perfectly fine. But if you do have multiple, it's not really a big deal if you don't. If you do have multiple trees, make sure you go separate, reset, and pick. Very important. Okay. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna change this from random to this poison disc. I don't even know how you pronounce it, but I don't care. So that just made sure that all of our trees are now being rendered on top of our sphere. One problem at a time. They're way too big, right? So what we can do is we can do a random value node and plug that into here, into our scale. And then I'm going to do like 0.05 to 0.03. Let's see how that's looking. That is still too big. Wow. Okay. Maybe we'll go 0.01 to 0.005. That's still a little small. Maybe I'll go like 1.5 and then we'll go 0.01. Okay, I like that size a lot more. This value might be different from you. Just make it however big you want. And then this range I did right here, 0.01 to 0.015, that just makes it so the smallest tree is 1% of the original size, and then the maximum size tree is 1.5% of the original size. But this random value you might have to play with a little bit just to get the scale right. But if you have any problems, it's perfectly fine. Very easy to deal with. All right. Next problem. All the trees are pointing straight up, which is not good. Right. What we want is them to point away from the center of the sphere, like I showed you in the original. All right. To do that, we want to import a node called the normal node. And this is basically just reading the normal of the thing that you want to read it from. In that case, we want to Shift A, and we want to do sample nearest surface. Go float to a vector, normal into value, and then mesh is going to be the original mesh that we started with, this little green guy up there. All right, next from the value, we're going to drag and we're going to type align, and then we want rotation to vector. It doesn't really matter which one you selected, but just make sure that value is going into the vector node, and then the rotation goes into rotation. Move that over here a little bit. And what that'll do is that'll make sure that all of our little trees are pointed away from the center. Okay, great. All right, what's next? Last thing for the trees is we are going to, or I guess like second to last thing, is we want to make sure that they're only on the continents. Not like we don't want trees in the middle of the ocean. That's not good. The trees will drown, and we don't like drowning trees. All right. Go to the modifier tab. Make sure you have your land selected, and we are going to add a subdivision surface modifier. Make sure, so you can drag these little dots over here to rearrange them. Drag it so it goes above the geometry nodes, and then change it from this Catmull Clark to simple. And then we're going to make that a number 2, and then we're going to apply that. And what that's going to do is that's just going to give us way more geometry than we had before. So what we can do is we can now go from edit mode to weight paint mode. Okay, before you start painting all over your object, go to the data tab over here with your land selected, and watch what happens to this vertex group once I start painting. Like that, it made a vertex group, right? So if there's no vertex group, that means all of the weights are 0, right? Which means that if we plugged this vertex group that doesn't exist into our density factor of the trees, there'd be no trees anywhere, right? But so if it's just 0 across the board like it is now, Blender just doesn't even create a vertex group. But technically, there already is one. Okay. I'm going to change the fall off and just click this little bracket right here, just to get sort of a cleaner paint. And I'm just going to paint one small area of the world. Just like North America. That's all I'm going to do right now. Get some in Alaska, get some in Canada, get some up here. And there we go. All right, just going to paint that. Make sure your weight is at 1, your strength is at 1, and the fall off, again, I just clicked that little bracket right there. Okay, let's go back to our geometry nodes. And what we're going to do is, see this density factor right here? We are going to add a node called named attribute. And if I go into my data tab, it should just be called group, right? But I'm going to name it something really obvious, like tree, a whole bunch of trees. And so when I click this little box right here, it says tree. So I know exactly which one it is. How smart am I, right? That attribute is going to be plugged in the density factor. And it doesn't look like it because there's not too many trees, but the only place the trees are spawning are on the places that we painted. So if I crank this density up, I can crank it as high as I want, and those trees will never leave that little area that I just made, right? Let's turn that back down, maybe to like 1,000. And then I'm going to change the distance minimum to like 0.15. That's good enough. 0.15, I like that. All right. Okay, yeah, so density max is 1,000. Distance minimum is 0.15 meters. So now I'm just going to go ahead and paint wherever I think there should be trees. So let's see. South America, there's lots of trees. Venezuela and Argentina and Chile. There's obviously lots of trees in Antarctica. So let's paint some trees there. Obviously lots in the Sahara Desert. That's why they call it the Sahara Forest. They actually don't, but you know. Also, you might notice that there's basically zero editing in this video while I'm just going along and painting. And that's because I don't know how to edit. So I'm not going to edit. Like I don't know how to edit. I have the software for it. I have Adobe Premiere and I have Illustrator and After Effects and all that great stuff, but I cannot be bothered. Okay, I think that's good enough, to be honest. Maybe we'll put some trees on Greenland. Maybe we'll make this a 0.12. Get some more trees up in here. By the way, if you have any trees that are faced sideways like that, that's probably just because you accidentally got some paint on the side of a continent. If you want to erase it, just make sure you change the weight to 0. And then you can just paint over wherever those trees are pointed sideways, and it'll just delete them. That's it. Okay. Let's see. Let's go back to object mode. Let's go back to layout. And then so that's looking pretty good so far. The last thing is let's do the clouds. So let's go Shift A, import another UV sphere. The last UV sphere we're going to make, I promise. I like to make it a little bit bigger than the tree line. So like there's the top of the trees poking out. So I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. There we go. All right. Same thing, go back to geometry nodes, and we're going to make a new one. And I'm basically just going to copy the old one. So if you click this little drop down right here, and then click geometry nodes, the one that we made before, this is very, very, very important. Make sure you click the 2. So that breaks it away from the old one. Otherwise, we'll be editing the other geometry node setup, which we don't want. All right. Very first thing we're going to do is hold down Control and right click. And we're basically just going to delete this, that line right there because we don't want to show the sphere in the final form. And then the only thing we're going to do is change this little tree collection to clouds. And then delete this named attribute. Just completely delete it. There we go. All right, so we have all these little clouds now. So what we can do with the clouds is I'm going to bump this density way down. You know, maybe something like that. We'll just go 10 for now. But then for the scale, these are way too small. So maybe we'll go like 0.1. That's still too big. Maybe like 0.05. Good enough, I think. And we'll go 0.02 for the size. All right. Very last thing before we go into the render settings, which will be the last thing. I think we should randomly rotate these clouds, which is what I did last time. So basically, this is okay. I lied. Maybe this is the hardest part, but which still isn't very hard. Hit Shift A and go to Vector Math, and then slap it in right here, right before it gets rotated. And basically, what we're doing right now is we're adding 0 to all of the vectors that's coming off for aligning it, right? And if we're adding 0, that means it's still the exact same. So what we need to do is we need to add we can just duplicate this random value node by hitting Shift D and then going from float to vector. And if we plug this in, we'll see that all the little clouds randomly rotated. But we want only the z-axis. So that's our x-axis, that's our z-axis, and then just make this like 1,000. Doesn't really matter what it is. Just matters that it's a really high sort of arbitrary number. And that is basically it. I think there's a little more clouds than there was in the other one that I made, where there's more clouds in this one, but that's perfectly fine. Very, very last thing is the render settings. So I'm going to be using cycles. I'm going to be using my GPU. Only 10 samples for the viewport and 250 for the render. Let's denoise that. And then very, very last thing is I'm going to import a sun. If you hit G to move the sun, move it over here. And if you double tap R, just like we did for the icosphere, just like go down a little bit and then go off to the side. And you might have to play with it while you're in the rendered view, but you know, I think if you hear my cat scratching her neck in the background, I apologize. You can hear a little bell. But if I go to rendered view, the only thing is it's looking a little dark. And how I like to fix that is just go into little data properties for the sun. And I always like to do like 4.5. I found that that's pretty realistic. Maybe not the most realistic in the entire world. Maybe it's 4. But that's basically it. So yeah, there's the low poly Earth. It only took us about 5 minutes to make the actual mesh, but and the rest was just trees and clouds and materials and lighting and stuff like that, and it seems to always go that way. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is sort of the first official video on my actual channel, Low Poly Addict, which I don't even know if I'll keep that name or not, but I love lots of low poly stuff. If you guys have other low poly stuff that you want me to make, or have questions about or anything like that, feel free to leave it down below. And I will hopefully see you guys very soon in the next tutorial that I have not planned or created yet. So see you guys there.